I'm just going to talk about 3 points, building on what Madhav has been talking about. And these points are centered around my recently concluded PhD, which it's still freshly minted. I mean, the ink hasn't dried. And it was on Indian civil service elites. You know, we talked about the bureaucracy, the steel frame. And I studied from a management perspective, the learning and innovation. And one of the first things which I would like to say is there were a lot of traditions and legacies in the civil service which were kept in the first 20, 25 years. And even today, some of those, for example, horse riding in the Mussoorie Academy being one of the forms of training a civil servant. And when it was proposed to one of our prime minister that should the women candidates have to learn horse riding, the response was, if you can't control a horse, you can't control a district. Now this became part of the folklore. And so a lot of these traditions and legacies were continued in the civil service. That was one of my main findings. But what was far more spectacular, what was very, very reassuring, was a lot of these traditions were modified for a democratic, socialist welfare state. For example, the notion of a developmental block. We developed small units in our district where development work was carried out. But most important, I would like to build on what Madhav has been talking about. Now we have, as you have heard, a very not so positive impression about bureaucracy. But what I found very interesting, even the ICS officers were not always towing the establishment line. And if I show you the transcripts, interview transcripts of some of my respondents of the generation who joined the services in 60s, you might think they're radical lefties. They themselves were complaining about the laws and the regulations. And a lot of their innovation, which I tried to capture in my thesis, was working around the regulations. And I still vividly remember the wonderful expression one civil servant used, social validation. He said, we too often forget. So there is another side of that civil service, which unfortunately gets lost as they grow older. I mean, the first 10 years of the civil service. So here is a phenomenal evolution of civil service based on British Raj traditions with a spirit of public service. And many of the older guard learned it from the British predecessors who went against the imperial diktat to serve the people. So there is a very incredible tradition of rebellious civil servant in India. And sometimes I was myself quite petrified recording that. I mean, I had a tape recorder, and they would grab the tape recorder and said, I don't care to hoots. You can put this on the YouTube. I want the world to hear. So this spirit of standing up is something which, of course, is not very widespread, but there are still quite a few. And that was my finding. The last 2 points which I would like to say is what was the feedback from my discussions which I've been having in my business school, which is just down the road, Cass Business School, is the Indian civil service, along with the civil society, which is now emerging, and in many states like Karnataka, what Madhav was talking about, or Kerala, the civil society and the civil administration work closely. In Bengal, unfortunately, because they had a left front regime for too long, it didn't blossom, but it is now happening. That this experience which India has developed can be a very valuable export, if I may use the expression, in the Commonwealth framework for a lot of emerging democracies. One of my examiners, she works on the Caribbean states, and she said, we can learn from this model because there are 2 successes of the Indian civil service here. One is the fair and free elections, and there have been, how many, I think 15, 20 elections since 47. Yeah, okay. And second is keeping the national unity intact, particularly in cases where you have communal riots, where you have caste riots, like wherever the social cleavages exist, and there's a flare-up of tension. And she told me that the Indian civil service proved to be much more effective than many other states where you have this kind of social cleavages when they erupted. So these 2 factors she felt can be a very valuable platform of discourse which UK and other Anglosphere countries can engage with India for a lot of the countries which want to emulate their democratic success. The third point is my humble and modest point. In India, we always like to add the preamble, my humble point, is I have seen in the district level that a lot of the renewable energy projects are happening in a fantastic collaboration between the civil society and the civil administration. Now this opens up a whole new opportunities in sectors like renewable energy, in sectors like, for example, biogas. And I think it is imperative that a lot of the companies in UK really start considering working at the grassroots level with the civil society, with the civil administration, in healthcare, maternity, school, education, what Mother was talking about in English language. And of course, renewable energy is my very dear and favorite topic because I have been involved in some of the projects, and clean drinking water. So these 3 points, I'd just like to build on what Madhav has been talking about. It can be a new platform for engagement between India, UK, and the entire Commonwealth. Thank you.